I feel kind of unique because I've actually never worked at an agency in my now about 10-year career. I've freelanced before, but I've never been at an agency. And I always kind of wondered if I missed out on some sort of critical experience. But ultimately, I really do like being in-house. I really like getting to know the products and the brands and like understanding the customer story and what we're enabling. And so I think that that kind of fits my personality a little bit better.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wanted to actually talk to you about that because I noticed from your job history that there is some freelance work in there, and then you went from freelance back in house and into agent. Well, not an agency, into a business. And like I have found myself going the other way. Like, did you always want to work business, like, or was the freelance thing something that happened to you and you kind of ran with it, like, or like what was the sort of thinking there, or what happened?
I think like very early in my career, like early 20s, when I was first kind of joining the workforce, I guess, I kind of started as a freelance writer and I worked within kind of just like doing SEO content for different clients. And I didn't really intend to, I kind of came to New York and sort of started my career in this sort of tech world accidentally. And I feel very lucky that that's sort of where I landed. But in my career, hopping from place to place, often when I've left one business, I've often stayed on in a freelance capacity to still do some of the work that I was previously doing. Because it's like, oh, it's a great benefit to the team because they already know me. They already know that I have a familiarity with the workflow and the style and the product. And I'm able to sort of take it on as well as like, a way to make a little bit of extra money, a way to just kind of like get that experience as well. So it's sort of just kind of worked out that I've had great relationships that have then led to kind of me staying on in a freelance capacity. And then there have, of course, been times when I get bored easily. So I kind of like to see what other things are out there. I'll apply to jobs sometimes and just see like, oh, what if I got this? What would this be like? What would I learn? What could it teach me? So it's been kind of a mix of intention and accident, I guess.
Have you always been in the tech space? Is that where your background is?
Yeah. So I moved to New York about 10 years ago. And like I said, I got hired in my first role to work at a B2B tech startup. Before that, like I said, I was operating as mostly a contractor and I sort of stumbled into this job. It wasn't where I intended to go, but I made a lot of my best friends there. I got a crash course in marketing a technical product. I was in a account manager role there at first. So I kind of got to learn how to support sales, create the collateral that they need to do their job. And I got to learn a lot about the product from support tickets and calls and speaking to customers directly. And that kind of was my first taste too of how exciting it is to work for a brand and a product that's disrupting a legacy space. In this case, it was a telecom provider. And this was like a fiber optic internet service provider trying to deliver internet that doesn't suck, kind of like coming to challenge Verizon, Fios, and Comcast and all of these like, terrible customer service providers. So yeah, that was my first kind of experience. And I was there for a few years and it taught me so much.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. My sort of first full-time kind of content gig was working for similar. So I'd had a kind of marketing exec role for a telco, and then I migrated to like a Salesforce partner, venture capitalist backed contact center business, which I never thought I would find exciting or interesting. But as with all those things, like once you start to get under the hood and understand the product and get a feel for all of that, you do get a very quick schooling in terms of you do work with support, you do work with sales, you speak to professional services, you speak to all the other marketing people like around the world who are sort of trying to sell this product in different markets. So that was a really informative like couple of years for me as well. And you were there for 5 years, did I hear you say?
I think a little over 3 years. Okay. And so, yeah, I started in that account manager role, but I was very open about the fact that I wanted to move into a content role. So I kind of I think for 6 months I was in that AM support role. And it was, like I said, a crash course into learning the landscape, which I didn't really have any familiarity with, learning the product, learning the ins and outs, and also seeing how our sales, like our outbound sales team functioned. And then, yeah, I was able to migrate into kind of like being the first content hire and sort of like creating collateral and working on that side of the business. And so, yeah, it was really like, it is kind of a funny, I share the sentiment of like, whoa, I never thought I'd be working for this like ISP and like working on internet, and it's a B2B space. So it seems kind of dusty and boring, but I think the benefit of working in-house somewhere is that you do develop that really deep connection to like what the brand is all about, the positioning, the differentiation, what kind of story are you trying to tell, and what are you trying to enable for customers? And so I think you really get to have more of like that emotional, like kind of like be part of the DNA of the business and really connect to it. So I did find it to be quite an exciting role, even though it was kind of like on paper maybe sounded a bit dull.
I think with all of those things, it's once you start to pick at the threads of like what makes everything tick, what makes the like there's the double fascination of like making things work internally, like managing like politics, relationships, teams, that side of it, which I've always found interesting anyway, and then actually like delivering the work and seeing it through from like inception to or like conception into like a fully formed idea, into a campaign, into like the results, and analyzing how things are performing and making those kind of tweaks and improvements. Like a lot of the stuff that clients I work with, I'm involved in any one of those stages, but it's very rare that I get to do the whole thing start to finish. And it was one of the
Yeah.
reasons why I moved away from the agency where I was working, was that we were at the briefing end, and I wanted to be doing like creating those briefs and see that stuff through. So I there are bits of it that I really miss. So after that, you're still obviously still in New York. You did. Where did you end up next
So
from there?
from there, I went to a company called Feather, and it was a subscription furniture rental company. And that was one of the best things about that was that I ended up connecting with a creative director named Remy Carliotes. He is like grumpy French guy who I just became like totally like we had such kindred spirits, and he and I aligned a lot on like our approach to creative work, and we ended up collaborating after that. He actually brought me in on, I don't know how much longer, maybe a year or so later. He brought me in, he was working on the Kitty shapewear by Lizzo, and so I was able to come in on that project, which was like so exciting. I'm a huge fan of Lizzo.
Cool. Yeah,
I never really worked on something like of that magnitude, and my role was mainly kind of coming in and helping to position a lot of the early sort of like, how is this a different shapewear, how is it standing out from competitors, like working on taglines. And so in a way, like a lot of that stuff is like my favorite part of the process, but also to your point, you don't get to see everything because there's like kind of a limit of what you have access to, and you're really working in your one silo. So that was a great experience, but it kind of also showed me like I prefer to have access to all of the information. I think like being on an in-house team, to your point, you get to see, like, you get to understand all the relationships, you get to talk to subject matter experts, you get to collaborate with different teams. And I think that in a role that's about content is kind of the cornerstone of everything. It's how you show up on your website and your ads and support and product. And so all these different channels, but content is like the bedrock. And so I think it's fun to be in that like DNA of the business. And I guess I'm kind of nosy, maybe a better word, curious, but I think that is kind of like an innate part of my personality that sort of drives me to want to connect the dots between the product.
I think being nosy, I think being that way, you have to be good at content. You sort of have to be sniffing out the details. You have to be like, why does that work? Why is it that way? Like, you have to have that curious mindset and not accept things at face value as well, right? Because someone just says, well, we do it this way. And I think the good content people, the really good ones, are the ones that say, oh, why is it that way? What does this mean? Like, and interrogate that in all its detail.
For sure.
So that's interesting, because that sounded like that was a lot of short form work, a lot of short copy, less strategy, certainly not technology. For
the experience, yes, for sure.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So you have experienced that. I mean, I guess that's B2C as well, right? So you've worked on both sides of the aisle, so to speak.
Yes. It's been, also then after that, I was on the content team at Better Mortgage, which is a digital mortgage lender. That was, again, like B2C, like kind of like demystifying buying experience. And that was also just like such a great example of something that interested me, like the topic. I didn't really know a lot about lending before that, or how you finance buying a home. And so being able to come in and really like learn about that topic and then distill it into educational materials and kind of like educate people, especially at the time. Like, I think I got hired in like December 2020. So like it was like peak like pandemic home buying, refinancing craziness.
Yeah.
And that was like an enormous company. Like, it was on a huge upward, like they hired like thousands of people that year that I was hired. And so it was like being a very small part of a massive machine. And I was just like very much in my own lane, doing my content. The content team was big. I was on the, long form side of it, doing a lot of like blog, SEO, article type stuff. And so then, I don't know if you're familiar with there was like a lot of press around the CEO at the time of we had some layoffs, and video of him was leaked. One of the Zoom calls was leaked. So that was in the press, which was also a new experience. I'd never been, at a company where there's getting all this heat and this coverage. And so then as a result of that, I got a ton of LinkedIn like recruiter reaching out to me being like, assuming that, maybe I see the writing on the wall, maybe I want to make a jump somewhere else. And so that's actually how I ended up getting connected to Hopscotch, and then going the total other end of the spectrum, which is the super small team. It's when I joined the company, the product was still in beta. We just had like a wait list of users, and I've never joined a team at like that early in the life cycle of the business. So I was part of, developing our go-to-market strategy. I was there for all those real-time learnings as we like launched and onboarded our first users, and then got feedback, got new users, new product features. And so it was totally opposite end of the spectrum of being at this enormous, almost, even though Better was still a startup, it felt very like corporate at that level because it was so massive. And then to go to Hopscotch where there's literally like 7 of us was just a total night and day.
So I'm intrigued for this because I do some work with startups and I work with some larger firms as well, and I know which ones I enjoy working with more. So you coming from that large / startup kind of so-called environment into Hopscotch, what did you make of that kind of shift in dynamic from being very much you work in this lane and this lane only to please wear all the hats, from sales enablement to marketing strategy to comms messaging to like how did you find that, and what's sort of been your experience of that to date? I know there's plenty of stuff we'll dive into, but I'm just intrigued at like your first kind of experiences of going through that, like, oh shit, I've got to do all of this moment.
I think it definitely was one of those moments in my career when I was like, I know I should say yes to this, but I'm scared because it's like it's a big, it's a lot of responsibility. It's a big step up. It's going to be some things that I'm familiar with, and then there's going to be parts of the job that I don't have familiarity with, and that's always scary going into the unknown. So I think it was kind of good in a way that the product it was almost like me and the product were like babies together. Like we kind of came in, I was getting my lay of the land, but like there wasn't a ton of immediate pressure because the product wasn't live yet. So that was good. It gave me time to kind of like plan. It gave me time to learn. And then of course, when the product did go live, it didn't do all the things that it does today. So it had a more limited feature set and functionality. So that allowed me to kind of also narrow in on, okay, who do we think this is a good fit for today? It's like not as robust as it will be in the future. So it's kind of like a more singular ICP. So I was kind of able to be like, okay, I think this is what it's good for. I think this is like how we can kind of connect with this community. So it was I liked building the go-to-market sort of strategy because you get to be very like methodical and problem solve and be like, okay, so like, this is who we're after. This is the story we're telling. These are the problems they have. This is why they're going to like us. This is how we're different. And then it's about kind of like going forth and finding all of those, like the channels that you think are going to be most effective in reaching your audience. And so it's a very kind of like fun web to weave and figure out like, oh, okay, is this working? Okay, we see this isn't working. You kind of get to see real-time results of like your decisions. And then you get to go back and say, okay, let's tweak this. Oh, we see that this is working, so let's pursue this. So there's a very real-time feedback loop that I found very satisfying, because it's like, it's not just like where you create a bunch of positioning and then you walk away and you're like, I think that's going to set you up for success, but you don't actually get to stick around for the results.
Yeah. So what were the first things that you did in terms of, you joined, product's not live, there's obviously the vision behind what you're doing, and maybe actually talk a little bit about that vision as well, because I'm sure that listeners to this will be, there's a fair few that Hopscotch is kind of aimed at and targeting at. But what were the sort of steps that you went through? How did you go about recruiting those first customers into the platform, and then how did you make use of those first customers? Like, I do a bit of work with startups, and those early adopters they're gold, right? They're absolute gold. So I'm intrigued to sort of hear from your perspective, like what you did at Hopscotch.
Okay, so let's see. So yeah, first of all, Hopscotch, what it is, it's a payments platform for small businesses. So it's invoicing and bill pay tool. And then there's also this very unique cash flow management control component, Hopscotch Flow. So that is similar to invoice factoring without so many of the downsides for small businesses. So, but that's the product today. So where the product was initially was just kind of like pay and get paid. And so I definitely brought a lot of my own experience as someone who had freelanced into this hypothesis originally of like, this is so great for someone who is an unsophisticated freelancer, maybe they're like sending invoices in like little tragic PDF attachments and emails. Like they don't really have a system that they use.
That's still me.
Yeah. So, I mean, and I've been there as well, right? Like you're just kind of like, okay, this is the end of the project. Let me just get this across the finish line. I need to get paid. But actually, the payment touch point is so important, and it's such a reflection of your professionalism and your business. And I think that a lot of people, particularly solopreneurs or small agencies, they are so busy all the time, and they don't have a dedicated financial like accountant, someone who's like making those decisions and doing those workflows. So often it's the owner operator who's just kind of like, okay, let me do this admin in addition to all the work they're also doing for clients. Mm-hmm. So it can become an afterthought, and it can be kind of like clumsy, or maybe it can even generate a feeling of like, is this like a real like you get an invoice that doesn't really look legit. It's going to maybe even create doubts about your business. So I kind of saw immediately like, wow, I would really like to use something like this. I never really did, maybe out of just like laziness or like whatever, my de facto system was working well enough. But so my original hypothesis was like, I could see really easily convincing a bunch of like solopreneurs, contractors, consultants, freelancers that this is just like an easy thing. There's fee-free payments. So bank transfer, ACH payments are free on the platform. So that's a huge benefit, because I think like a lot of times fees just like cannibalize small businesses in particular, right? Like you don't really have time to find a solution that's going to set you up for the best to optimize your revenue, keep more money in your pocket. So that was like kind of my initial, like, I can definitely imagine selling this to myself or to like freelancer friends of mine. And so we started there. We always kind of had this vision in the back of our product roadmap was essentially kind of always going to be add more features and functionality, make it a tool that's maybe even more suited to a traditional small business use case. But like we didn't start there. So we had to kind of start where we were. So then from there, it was kind of about like finding a lot of where are these people online, like finding the communities that they're active in, kind of like leveraging the trust of the, like, if they're in a Slack group, if they're in a Reddit thread, if there's someplace where they really like go to get information and like, ask questions about their business, how can we show up there and get in front of their eyeballs and kind of like sell them on the product? So we ended up kind of having our first big, like, I think the original list that we had of like people on the wait list was from I want to say like a B2B like event that it was before my time, but like that the team had gone to, and they'd gotten a bunch of people who were interested in the product. So that was like that list. And then in terms of building the list from there and kind of like finding more users, I was like really interested in influencer marketing. I was interested in like, I follow like a handful of like people on Instagram or on LinkedIn who I really trust. Like, I think that they give great advice, and like, how can we collaborate, create content with these people, get in these newsletters, get in these Slack channels, kind of like be where our ICP is and sort of like speak the language that they're speaking and leverage the trusted resources that they already go to like answer questions about their business. So we had our first kind of big success with influencer marketing, and it was so exciting to see like, whoa, like we worked with this guy who was like I think he was like a developer, but he like was a freelance developer. He worked with a lot of agencies, and he just had a massive following on Instagram. And so we like had him create a short video just about like invoicing and how easy it is with Hopscotch. And we just got a bunch of signups from that, which was like super cool. Unfortunately, as time went on, influencer marketing would have like big spikes, but then like not always perform in the way that we anticipated. It was really hard to predict. It was hard to kind of like make it measurable and make it a real strategy. And so then I think as time went on, we kind of, we realized we need to kind of diversify our channels. So that's kind of a little bit about. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to ask about that. So was that in terms of like peaks and troughs in working with influencers? Was that budget allocation in terms of if you could work with more and have a steady stream of budget going into that channel or into that world with those influencers? Would that have like mitigated some of those peaks and troughs, do you think? Or was it just a case that actually like it was just too unpredictable in general for the consistency the business needed?
You mean like if we could have thrown enough money at it, would it have worked?
Yeah. Was the peaks and troughs to do with, we would allocate a certain amount of budget and that didn't spread over the month, or like, so I'm just intrigued to sort of understand.
I think that it would have been nice to have more money to play around with, but at the end of the day, the product was developing in a direction where freelancers actually became not our ideal ICP, because as we onboarded more of them. We saw that they were great fans of the product for its invoicing capacity. But once we launched Flow, I was of the hypothesis that there would be a use case for freelancers as well, because it's like, oh, often there's gaps in when you want to get paid early. There's sometimes gaps in work and you need to like accelerate cash flow to you. And then we just didn't see them adopting that tool in the way that we thought we would. And so we knew we needed to kind of like expand our ICP, because as we had gone on with this strategy, of course, the product had also become more sophisticated and did more things. So we could actually speak more to like a small business owner who might have, invoicing and bill pay needs, and a use for this cash flow tool that we had built.
Okay, that makes sense. So migrating away from influencer marketing and working with influencers, what was the kind of next steps to go after the sort of smaller biz community? Where did you migrate efforts and focus to?
So we're kind of getting up to where we are today more so. And I think our strategy is like still evolving, and we're still kind of trying to see, like, we have about 5,000 businesses on the platform today. And we're kind of trying to get more diligent in the way that we understand their needs and segment them and market to them. And so I think we're kind of seeing some types of businesses that use Flow, some types of businesses that are more interested in the invoicing and bill pay side of things. So our strategy today is kind of like a mix of traditional like organic and paid channels. So I'm running more of the content side of things. I'm working with an agency to kind of refresh our SEO strategy, which previously, of course, was competing for a lot of keywords relating to freelancers. Now we're migrating to actually talk more about invoice factoring and cash flow management, so we can kind of maybe net some traffic that has an interest in the cash flow side of the product. So we're working with an agency to fine tune our SEO. We have a head of growth who's working with an agency to kind of fine tune our PPC and our paid search ads. And I think that like the rest of like the leftover bandwidth on our team is sort of like, I had experienced a lot of success with like content partnerships. And so then I think that was kind of a good template for biz dev, like other sorts of partnership opportunities. So then now we have someone sort of managing that side. And I think all of those things kind of creates like our sort of main three channels of how we're pursuing new customers. And then, my work is about kind of creating that funnel from a content perspective, producing like, now that we have these great customers who use the product, I've been trying to do a lot more like customer case studies and really like dig into the benefits of the product, the impact on people's business. Reed, the founder, has become really excited about doing more product demos. We see that is a really helpful factor in kind of like getting people to convert. So yeah, all those things are kind of just across the board about like improving our acquisition, but then also like activation. It's not just getting these people to sign up, but are we also finding people who have a genuine use case for the product? Are they then activating in the platform in the way that it was intended to be used? So we're just like, I think we have some good like always on channels at this point. We're narrowing in and kind of like dialing in on like who exactly our core ICPs are and how can we get even more sophisticated and specific in the way that we speak to them. And then we're also leaving a bit of room, which I'm so grateful for, but leaving a bit of room for experimenting, because I think that like, I couldn't do this job if I didn't have permission to be a little bit like weird and like take risks sometimes and like do things that are a little unconventional and see what works and see what doesn't, So I think that that's another important like factor in our strategy.
And it's a competitive market that you're operating in, right? So you need to find ways to break through and sort of drive that penetration and awareness in terms of, ousting some of the incumbents that have sort of cannibalized a lot of the market. So I'm intrigued can you share one of your most recent experiments or what you're considering or working on at the moment?
Yes, definitely. So one of the things that is still in motion, we haven't quite got to the point where we can report on like the full business impact, but I want to talk about it just because it started out as this tiny little like single cell organism of an idea where I had this thing in my brain and now it's kind of become something with a lot of community building and growth potential. So I think that's the reason I want to talk about it. Just like I nurtured it along until it was in a position to really like, I think now drive value for the business and also still retains that like white hot core of what got me excited about it in the first place. So that's a really special feeling that it's sort of still got that. So the campaign is called Secrets of Success. And I have to start by saying, I don't know if you've ever heard of Post Secret, which was like a long running community art project.
No, I haven't.
Okay. So it's sort of like postsecret.com really captured my imagination and my attention when I was like a teenager, I think it would update like every Sunday, but essentially people would mail in postcards with secrets that they'd never told anyone. And there was definitely an element of like graphic kind of like collage and like homemade craft to the design of lots of these. Like they would be just like really visually cool, as well as like what was written on them was really cool. So they would range from being like superficial and silly to sometimes like really heartbreaking or, you know, troubling or dark. And so I was just like fascinated by the idea that so many people had these deep secrets and that they were sharing them in this public format. And then secondarily, I think I was really like amazed at how relatable so much of it was, because I think there's something so universal, the more in deeply specific and personal testimonials. Like the more specific it is, the more relatable it is, weirdly. So anyway, yeah, exactly. Like the more specific it is, the more universal. So this whole project always just kind of like fascinated me and was always in the back of my mind. So fast forward to late last year, we're sort of like brainstorming ideas to build and engage our community. We are a small team, limited resources. So we're kind of also thinking of solutions that don't require as much bandwidth. So on social, we do a lot of product marketing, which is educational, but it's not necessarily like thumb stopping. And so I wanted to kind of think about a campaign that would really grab people and jump out at small business community as being like relatable and something that they just want to click on and kind of like learn more about. So we had this like audience of creative businesses in our community, and it just seemed like an enormous resource of like untapped potential and content storytelling stuff. So I thought like a UGC approach might be a bit of a self-sustaining. The initial conceit was really simple. It's just like, what if we just ask small business owners to tell us one secret about their business? And it can be like really simple, or it can be like, you know, it can be like a tip or a trick, or it can be like a confession, something that you feel like you've done wrong. So we just wanted to create this like simple Google form and kind of like invite people to anonymously share something about their experiences. And we kind of like at that time, we were like, oh, this has legs, but we didn't action on it immediately. And I think that that was like really beneficial, because so much of my inherent like instinct is to like get a V1 up and running really quickly just to prove that it has legs or that we can stand it up and do it. But we kind of like, it was sort of like near the end of the year and we had other things. So it was kind of like on the back burner and it was marinating. And I think that gave me more time to think through the like strategic sort of like, how could this be not only a cool campaign, but like a growth engine and like a community moment. And so I think that by the time we were ready to activate on it, it was a more robust idea. We had taken time to define the assets really well. We had partnerships with communities that we knew were going to like amplify and invite people to give feedback. And so I think, the first round, we got like 100 plus secrets, and they were like, so just an amazing range of like content from people. Some of it was silly. Some of it was like really gut wrenching. And like, you really hear how hard it is for small business owners to do what they do. And I think that it taught us so much about the mindset of like what the challenges are that they face, not just in like the logistical sense, but also in this emotional sense of like how difficult it is to balance, keep all these plates spinning. And I think we were able to identify a lot of trends and patterns, like some of our product solves for, and then some of which just is like human and relatable. So we also ended up creating a trend report from all of this information. So I think it's like going to be something that we do probably twice a year, maybe just like a long form trend report. The landing page remains open. And we've also seen like, this is kind of the part that's still in flux, but like we got so much great content. A lot of it is static. So we were like, how could we turn this into motion content? How can we get this to be something that's a little bit more, even more dynamic and engaging? So we ended up renting a little like podcast studio space and just had our team sit down for a few hours and go through a lot of the content and just give reactions and like conversation about it. And I think this was a really great lesson in kind of like mileage out of getting more mileage out of content. Like, how do you like, how do you squeeze the most juice out of the lemon if you're going to go for it? So it's just been like it's been this great experience of seeing it start out as this really small idea and then kind of evolve into this large campaign, thinking through a lot of the practical sort of side of things of like, okay, how do we retarget visitors to this landing page? How do we nurture them with content? How do we sort of not do a super hard sell for Hopscotch, but there are actually like a lot of secrets from people being like, I really worry about like if I'm charging the right rates for my services, or I get embarrassed to send an invoice sometimes because I feel like I have imposter syndrome and I feel guilty like asking for money for the work that I've done. So those are actually natural opportunities for us to sort of step in and like maybe like do a little bit more of a hard sell on our product. But I think that, ultimately, I think this is a great community building project. And I don't want it to be a place that's like a super hard sell, but I do want to also activate all those different levers of, this is great traffic in. How do we consistently stick with them and remind them and kind of introduce them to Hopscotch as well?
I love that. Such a novel idea. While you were talking, I've opened up postsecret.com. So I had a quick look as you were talking, scrolling down, and I really like the sort of postmodern kind of juxtaposition of like some of the really hard hitting comments with pictures of very sort of light, airy sort of pictures of love scenes and stuff. Like that it was, but then like the copy was hard. And I guess it's a bit different, obviously, in a B2B scenario than on the difficulties of the human condition. But it feels like from a design and from a sort of visual perspective, there's a lot to play with there. Plus, you've got, like you said, you've got the trends report, but you've got a constant vein and tap into what's really going on, what people are really struggling with. So there's a bank of content that you can create. And I love going to a studio and recording that, kind of like when it's celebs read out their nasty tweets in front of a camera.
Yeah, I definitely had that vibe. And not all of us, we're not like content creators. So there's also a certain amount of vulnerability in going in and being on camera, but I think that that's kind of the energy I wanted to reciprocate, because so many people were vulnerable in what they shared. And
what's some of the hopes from this campaign for you? Is this purely a brand play, or I know you talked about there does obviously need to be some, dare I say, ROI from it, but there is obviously still that need, particularly as you said, you're still quite a young business. I'm just intrigued from your point of view, like what does it look like for you? What are you working towards?
Yeah, I think that of course I want to contribute to all of the business metrics and get more people excited about the product and sign up for the product. But I think that there's so much in the B2B world, there's so much like boring, hard selling going on, and there's not a lot of like soft underbelly to brands. And I think that primarily for me, this is kind of like a brand content moment, because I think that even though it's maybe not selling the product directly and not talking about what Hopscotch does, at the end of the day, what's exciting about Hopscotch is what it enables for its customers. It enables like so much more for the small business community, and it supports this entrepreneurial spirit and these people who have like real grit and determination to go out and strike out on their own, whether it's as a freelancer, or they're spinning up their own agency, or they're starting their small business. Small businesses make up a huge portion of the economy. They're incredibly important contributors to local economies, to communities. And I think that, Secrets of Success is kind of like speaking to that thing that Hopscotch is enabling. It's like that the people who are behind the businesses that they're running, all of the things that they struggle with. And as a product, we want to support that, but also as a brand and a community, we want to give a place for those conversations. And like, I think there's so much happening on like LinkedIn these days and a lot of different channels where you get dazzled by people who seem to have it all figured out, and they have a playbook, and they have like, the 5 secrets or whatever. And a lot of times we're all making it up as we go. And I think there's something so galvanizing and so special about just admitting that, even if you're doing it anonymously, and then seeing that 100 other people are in the same boat as you is just like really important to me.
Yeah, no, definitely. Where can people find this? So you said Secrets of Success there, but I imagine that quite a few listeners to this will be small biz owners in some way, shape or form, and probably have their own secrets to share. So if you can share the link with me, I'll make sure it's in the show notes so you can read it out now if it's a easily memorable one.
Yeah, it's attached to our website. So it's gohopscotch.com/secrets of success. And then there's a TikTok channel and there's a Instagram channel. You can drop those in the show notes as well. But yes, it's just a little landing page, a little humble landing page where you can reveal your darkest secrets.
Yeah, I might have to go visit that. Thank you for that. So the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about, because a client that I'm working with, we did a similar thing. We tried to launch on there as well. And you've mentioned that, would you call it a separate product flow? Or is it?
No, it's a feature of our product. But I think if you're going to talk about product, we did kind of launch it as its own product.
Yeah. There you go. You did a product hunt launch, and if anyone who listening has been through that, they are quite a grueling experience. So I'm intrigued as whose idea was that? Was that yours, or were you on the grateful beneficiary of running running that project? And how did it go? What did you learn? Because for us, it was a painful but sort of very rewarding sort of 24 hours, I guess.
So I have never launched on Product Hunt before, although being in tech for the last 10 years, I've definitely been at businesses where I either just missed the launch, I came in after, or it happened, but I wasn't a part of it. So I think we always kind of like in our collective hive mind as a team knew that like maybe it would make sense for us to do this at some point. And flow being our biggest differentiator and the thing that we're most excited about bringing to more small businesses, kind of wanted to focus in on that. But we launched Flow about a year ago, but there was essentially a cap on how much business we could support because it was through our own debt facility at the time. Now we have a new financing partner, and this gives us the ability to support the demand that we've seen for the product since we launched it and brought it to market. So now that we can really support more fully, we were like, okay, so maybe now it makes sense. This is a great thing to announce on Product Hunt. And then also if it does drive, some traffic, we can definitely support that. So that was kind of like we were waiting. We didn't really know for what, but then this happened and we were like, okay, this makes sense. So I had to do essentially like a crash course in figuring out the strategy for, best practices and like getting a checklist together of everything we would need. I think we probably spent about like 6 weeks doing that. So I was very much part of like the organizing of that and like kind of outlining everything we would need to create, all the assets, the steps, the order of operations. We started kind of like laying the groundwork in terms of, I think a lot of success on Product Hunt hinges on getting that groundswell of support from your network. So we kind of started activating partner communities, whether that was like content partnerships that we'd done in the past that had just been really positive, or personal networks or agencies that we were working with, just kind of like reaching out to a lot of the connections that we had. And then secondly, it was sort of like, okay, how are we going to frame this story that's going to be exciting and compelling to people who aren't super familiar with our product landscape? I think we have a pretty niche product, invoicing and bill pay. So those were kind of some of the challenges at the outset. We were also lucky enough to be able to have an opportunity to sit down with Rajiv, the CEO of Product Hunt, and we actually got a chance to pick his brain. So that was really helpful too. It was like a 20-minute call, but he just like dropped a lot of great knowledge. And one of the things that he said that really stuck with me was like, you really need a good hook and to tell a clear story. And I hadn't even really been thinking about that because I'd been so thinking about like a lot of the logistics, right?
Yeah.
So that was a good like 11th hour. Oh, we need to like make sure this is really like compelling and exciting. And so we kind of went back and forth on like some of the tactical stuff of like, what's the best day to launch? We ended up going with like a Monday because it seemed like we might have less competition and be able to rank on the leaderboard more effectively. We also debated whether we should hire someone to hunt our product. There's a lot of like, dissenting opinions about like, what's the best strategy? Should you hunt your own product? Should you get somebody who has a following? And we ended up just hunting our own product this time around. I think one of the things I was surprised to learn is that like a product hunt, while that event is like one and done, like one day, there's businesses that launch multiple times on Product Hunt. And so like, I was excited to be like, okay, like that took a little bit of the pressure off of like, even if this isn't like the best result, we can do it again, or we can do like, there's other opportunities. So
you came third. I'm just checking here. It's pretty strong. What beat you? Do you remember?
Something AI definitely was like the number one spot. And I actually don't remember who was the second place, but for a while. So the day of, we woke up, all of us at 3 a.m., started activating kind of international support because we were like, let's have a wave early on and get to like, our goal, I think, was like, we want to be at like 100 upvotes by 8 a.m. Eastern time. And so that was kind of like, if we do that, I feel like we'll be in a good position. One of the things that Rajiv had also mentioned was that the day of our launch was also the day that they were activating a new feature, like a shout outs feature. And so you could tag like 3 products that you've used to build your product. And so that gave us another way to amplify. We tagged like some of the tools that we'd used to build Flow. And then we tagged like the CEOs of those tools on social. And so it's just kind of trying to about like create as many waves as possible out beyond your communities. So we got number 3 product of the day badge. I think we got ended up with 400 plus upvotes, had
Mm-hmm.
over 100 comments. We had built a unique landing page for all the traffic that we were going to drive. And so we
Yeah,
got
nice, smart.
yes, that was a good call. We were able to measure how many unique visitors we got to that landing page. We got about 20 signups that fully completed our onboarding, which isn't a huge number, but it's something.
It's 20 new.
Yeah. And I think our key learnings was first of all, it was just a really good experience. None of us had ever done it before. And I think it's a good,
Good team building, right?
Yeah, exactly. We're all kind of together. We're
Yeah.
all feeling crazy by the time it's 10 a.m. and you're all you're running on fumes. I think that considering that AI is definitely the darling of that community and a lot of communities right now, and that our product is somewhat niche, hitting number 3 on the leaderboard is a big win.
Yeah, it's huge.
We told a compelling story to people who don't really know what our product does. I think there's a big barrier there of invoicing and cash flow is kind of not super relatable, but the story was exciting to people. I think I was surprised by the number of technical questions that we got, which was awesome because we were able to answer those questions and have a lot of great conversations. And then also, your profile remains active. So it's always there. If somebody does encounter it, they can learn about flow and the use case and drive awareness.
Yeah, it's a good SEO play. Like you say, it's always there. I'm just looking at your hook now, never get paid late again. And then poor cash flow is the number 1 killer of small businesses. So immediately relatable, understandable for even people who aren't a small business, but they probably work with small businesses in one way, shape or form, and have probably been late to pay in one way, shape or form. I think we can all be guilty of, particularly if you're a smaller business with a lower ticket price, there you sort of feel oddly less compelled to pay that you can afford to wait.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a good story. Anything else you want to share or plug? What does the sort of this year have in store? Obviously, you've got your Secrets of Success campaign, which is up and running now. Have you got more scheduled for later this year? What does 2024 look like? Are you a VC funded firm? Are you looking at securing funding, going for Series B, or where
we
are
you funded? Yes, and I think we're going to look to potentially raise Series A later this year. So I think that's a really exciting milestone and something that we're all kind of working towards. We want to tell, obviously, a very exciting story about the product from an investor perspective and show. So previously we were a freemium model, and then late last year we activated a Hopscotch Pro, gated some of our more premium features, put them behind a paywall. So that's its own workflow and journey, is figuring out pricing and transitioning your community to paid plans. And so I think, we want to be for a lot of the small business community. We do have a lot of freelancers on the platform. We've started looking at more traditional small business structures and agencies in particular. We see that there's a great use case for flow with agencies because they work with a lot of different clients every month and they have to pay out contractors and freelancers themselves. So we're getting a little bit more targeted speaking to them. And then there are kind of these larger businesses that are super interested in flow as an invoice factoring tool, not so much maybe in our invoicing tool itself. And so I think that, we want to always have a version of the product that's free and useful. I think that's really important to our ethos of you can come here and just have a really reliable, easy to use, all-in-one payments platform. And if you choose to use it for invoicing, it's just a great way to get paid with 0 fees. And then there's kind of there's our pricing tier that's, I think it's $45 a month right now. We're still playing around with exactly what the right pricing structure is, but
yeah.
You get a lot of value out of it. We're always adding new features. Our roadmap is very robust. And then Flow is just this 2.0 version of itself. It's better than it's ever been. It's a great way to accelerate cash flow on demand. There's no credit check. You can find out instantly if your invoice qualifies rather than filling out a ton of paperwork or waiting, days talking to some sort of lender or bank. And it's completely private. So your clients don't have to know if you're flowing your invoices. So I think we have really compelling kind of use cases for different types of businesses right now. And I think we just want to keep growing the community and the ecosystem and having people take advantage of all of the great features that we're building.
Yeah, brilliant. And I will be checking it out as a small business myself. Does it work in the UK or is it US only?
It is currently just for US based businesses.
Okay, that's cool. Brilliant. Thank you, Bret. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us, and all the great stuff that you mentioned we'll make sure are in the show notes.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much for having me. It was so nice to meet you
face
to face. Our LinkedIn DMs.
Yeah. Cheers, Bret.